Welcome to Longterm. I'm Ty King, and one of the benefits of doing this podcast is learning from the many different types of professionals that are in the field of recovery itself, and just helping people live better lives. I think is what we've kind of turned into, and found that in so many different cases, people aren't just using substances. They're not just committing crimes and needing reentry. Those all stem from something, some sort of either trauma or an event that happened in their life, or maybe they find themselves in certain circumstances where they don't see a way out. And as the services for those things grow, we are looking at how does technology help? How's technology going to help us for the future? We're looking for sustainable and realistic ways of maintaining a long-term, more a life that is stable. Mostly, whenever you tell somebody you need to be a contributing member of society, like what does that mean? I'm sure that there's an ideal in their head of what to become, and for most people that are in either reentry or in some sort of recovery, maybe it doesn't feel realistic. Maybe they feel like they're the only one that's dealing with this issue, and so that is a long way of saying that technology is going to help us to find more sustainable ways of making a better life for people that need it, and need a little help, so a little boost. Anyways, one of the best parts of doing this podcast is being able to talk to the actual professionals, which I have learned come in many shapes, forms, and sizes. And sometimes they're tan with white teeth and really nice demeanor to them. Uh, but John Roach, I learned about you because somebody told me about what you were doing with Resultant, and it really intrigued me with what you guys are doing. And so what I'm going to do is we're going to have a conversation and just talk about what the work is, how you got into it, and just see where it goes from there. But yeah, I'm just really excited to learn about how this is going to help, because this is something I haven't heard being implemented anywhere else. And so it's great. So John, you are with Resultant, and thank you so much for being here and on this strange filming set that we're on today.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me, Ty.
Yeah, like I said, I'm really excited to learn. So I'm just going to let you sort of go and riff off of this. First of all, what is Resultant?
Sure. So you actually you mentioned some things that are like squarely in alignment with the reason we exist. So we also firmly believe that helping organizations more effectively leverage data and technology to accomplish their missions is going to be key going forward, even more than it has been in the past. So we were created almost 20 years ago now with that as our mission. We started off mostly in the private sector, but have now are sort of equally serve both private and public sectors, helping them more effectively leverage technology and data. And so I've been in the president role for about 5 years now, but with the company for 15. And I've spent a lot of my time in the public sector. And with this topic specifically, um, one of the great things about being sort of this intersection of technology, data, and government is you get to really help people,
Yeah.
and you get to have an actual impact on people's lives in society in a way that often technologists don't.
Right.
So that's been really exciting for us and a lot of people that work for us.
And that's really interesting because I've talked to so many different, especially the nonprofit organizations that are out there, right, that are trying to help people in recovery or reentry. And they will, like in Arkansas, where I'm from, right, so they put together these special task force where it is members of and leaders from these different communities, peer specialists, peer recovery specialists, and get them together, and they will come before policymakers and work with them saying, okay, what's working? But the question, because I've watched a dozen of these, every time the policymakers want to know, okay, what are the results? And they're like, results are they get their life back together, they're getting jobs. Show me that. Show me the data. And so as that kind of, it's hard for a lot of these nonprofits to understand how to even collect data or how to record or quantify the work that they're doing. So how does Resultant help with that?
So I'll say this is one of the most positive and potentially negative trends we've seen.
Hmm.
So I'll give a couple examples. I think a knee-jerk reaction of a lot of people who aren't really close to the topic. It's actually happened to us when we first started doing work around criminal recidivism. And the folks that were passionate about improving it, but not knowledgeable, said, I'm paraphrasing only slightly, well, just tell us the programs that are working and the programs that aren't working, and we'll cancel all those that aren't working.
Right. Yeah.
And we did some initial analysis on the problem and actually found that some of the programs, at least on the surface, looked to have a net negative effect. So if you compared people who participated in those programs versus the broader incarcerated population,
Right.
what you saw is people who happened to participate in those programs had a worse outcome than people who didn't participate in any program.
Wow.
What we found was there's often a heavy self-selection bias into a subset of programs. And when we looked at some of the people in those programs, I'll talk about recidivism as the outcome, even though I think that's a fairly narrow view. Their recidivism outcomes were actually way, way, way worse than the general population. And that program had a really positive net effect for them, but they're still worse than the average. So when you look at the incremental contribution to a positive outcome, those programs were great for those people.
Right.
But I say it's potentially negative because someone who only goes that far and says, tell me the programs that are working and aren't working, I cancel those programs that had a huge positive effect for a subset of people.
Yeah.
I'm also sort of highly aware of and empathetic to you mentioning that it's often hard for not-profits to be able to quantify the effects that they're having. We were fortunate enough to work on a project with United Way of Central Indiana recently on this very topic. So what United Way often does is they fund other community-based organizations focused on problems like these and this problem specifically. But those organizations are often even smaller. And if you ask them about the outcomes that they're creating, what you'll often hear is, well, I don't know. We delivered these services to this family and we think it went really well, but they completed the program or they're no longer getting services. We have no idea what happened with them. So we worked on a public-private partnership with United Way of Central Indiana and the state of Indiana to basically give them that long-term outcome information. So we took the group of people that got those subset of programs over a long period of time. We matched them up with the information the state already maintains. Of course, I won't get into the detail here, but preserving privacy is extraordinarily important when you do something like that. So what we ended up doing it was a double blind analysis. So we aggregated the data even on the outcomes. So those community-based organizations, et cetera, wouldn't have any information about the people that they shouldn't have. Reciprocally, the state wouldn't have any information about program participation being a subset of people. So it ended up being double blind. But the most powerful part of that is now you ask those community-based organizations, tell me about the outcomes that you're creating for people, and they can tell you. They can tell you about the workforce outcomes, the criminal participation outcomes, the consumption and need-based services, all of those things, and build a really holistic picture of the outcomes they're creating, and also the subpopulations they're able to serve more effectively or less effectively. So they might tailor programs and services even better to those that aren't working for well now.
It seems like an incredible tool that people are going to they're going to have to use this, right? They're going to have to use this or something similar to it in order to, like I said, quantify the work that they are doing or to get that data so that they can trade that. So I know we're going to get into, what you are doing with the programs that you're creating now, but do you think that it's going to be able to serve, across the U.S.? Let's say, let's just start there with the country.
I think so. A couple thoughts for nonprofits. I think what you're already seeing is a demand from the market. So people who fund those nonprofits, for the nonprofits to quantify the outcomes they're creating. So I think in the nonprofit space, yes, that'll happen. Yes, it'll happen nationally because I think it's being demanded. But again, I think that's great if the folks doing the analysis are thoughtful and appreciate the nuance in how to do that effectively. On the second topic with governments effectively using that data, I personally think governments have an obligation to use the data they maintain on behalf of citizens to create the best possible outcomes they can for citizens and leverage that data to its full value.
Okay.
Will they? I think voters will decide if they do or not. So I think it's up to you and me and everyone else to make sure that they operate effectively, make sure that they, of course, maintain our privacy, but also make sure that they use the data they maintain on behalf of citizens to create the best possible outcomes they can for citizens and run those governments as effectively and efficiently as they can.
I can imagine for anybody that's making a decision on that, as a voter, even, is that you'd want to see, okay, well, what do we get out of this if we do, if we do back this? And so I do want to talk about the work that you're doing with Indiana specifically right now. And so we're in Indianapolis, if I didn't explain that before. Yeah. And so getting to come to where you have these contracts with the law enforcement across the state, I want to hear about, first of all, how did that become a thing? And then what are you doing with them?
Sure. I think Indiana was one of the first states to see, I'll kind of, backtrack.
Sure.
One of the first states to see that almost never does a state agency or a program have all the information it needs to understand people in context. So that 360-degree view of a person. So the example I just gave about nonprofits understanding the long-term outcomes they're creating, I could say the same thing about virtually every state program. So if you think about the WIC program, it's women, infant, and children. It's supplemental nutrition assistance targeted at specifically moms that just had kids, right? So that program, the intent of that program is to create a trajectory change in those people's lives.
Right.
Right? It's to improve the long-term health of the kid, mom, all those sorts of things. But if you ask a WIC director really easy questions about that program, so the intent was to create this long-term trajectory change in people's lives. Are you? They would say, I have no idea, because I can't see them after they access the program.
True.
If you ask them, are you getting the right people into your program? They would say, I have no idea. I can tell you about if once someone applies, if they're getting processed effectively, but I have no idea if the right people are applying. I have no idea. So what Indiana saw was they would essentially have to build the foundation to be able to leverage data from across the state to knit together that holistic picture to allow all of those program directors to say, yes, I am or I am not creating the outcome that this program was intended to create, and to be able to improve that program.
Yeah.
So as a citizen, that's what you want. You want them to run those programs as effectively as they possibly can run with. And they can't do that without information about the outcomes they're creating.
Right.
So Indiana stood up what's now called the Management Performance Hub to essentially enable that longitudinal analysis and data sharing while preserving the privacy of individuals. So we were fortunate enough to help them kind of envision what that should be and stand it up from the technology to processes to underlying organizational infrastructure, all of that. And then a lot of the work that we have done has been focused on big, hairy problems that tend to span lots of areas of government. So a great example of that is the one you just brought up around the opioid crisis specifically. Who's supposed to solve that problem? Lots of people.
Right.
So law enforcement has a role. The whole, medical landscape has a role. Of course, that has implications in corrections, child welfare, Department of Health, lots of places. But it's not anyone's job specifically to solve the problem, and no one has all the pieces they need to solve the problem. So what we helped do was stand up a data infrastructure that, again, allows us to see all of the facets of that problem. So the pain resolving cycle and all of the things associated with that. All of the options for treatment and services for folks that are addicted. All of those things. And then basically bring together the group of people who all play a role in solving the problem, from law enforcement to health, that whole spectrum I just mentioned, and have them, frankly, like all reading from the same sheet of music. So they're all looking at the same data. They're all looking at that holistic picture of the problem. And now they can all understand what role they can and should be playing in solving the problem.
So they have access to, I'll say, basically like a dashboard, right? Where it has, it's aggregating all the data. Where they're seeing, generalized numbers, maybe not individuals. You're not tracking, like I said, privacy. So you're not able to track, well, did this person go check in with their parole officer, or did they write those types of things? So you're seeing a general overall what is working and what is not working for the general mass. When we talked a little bit earlier, where recovery is not just for one particular person, right? So there's so many different approaches, like you said. Whose problem is the opioid crisis to solve? Well, it's everyone. I mean, there's so many different facets to that. How do you, I guess, when we're going back again to, we were talking about one of these policymakers, they asked a small nonprofit, hey, is your program working or is it not? And it may be working for 3% of the people that come through there, because their approach is very specific to what works for those 3% of people, versus the 97%, which needed something else or something else, something else. They may need it to be more mental health related. They may more spiritual, whatever it is, to get them started. So how do you, is there a way to quantify that data on that you're collecting and saying, or is it just saying, for the most part, this is what's working for people?
No, think of it more like subgroups of people with shared characteristics.
Okay.
So I'll build that characteristic person
Okay.
for you. So let's think about two subgroups. So let's say one subgroup is men between 50 and 60 who were high school educated, went to some college, were working a blue collar job, got injured while doing that job, have no history of drug involvement or abuse, happened to get prescribed something for an injury on the job, became addicted. The programs and services that are going to work for that subgroup are very different than a 16-year-old who dropped out of college or dropped out of high school, doesn't live with their parents, has a history of involvement with drugs, has problems with addiction, and happened to get addicted to the same drug that 50-year-old did.
Yeah.
The way that you have to treat the underlying causes for addiction for those subgroups need to be reflective of who they are as people. And the huge advantage, I think, that governments have in this and should play a role in this is you take those two scenarios and you ask an expert what's going to work for them. That expert ideally has built a mental model from seeing lots and lots and lots and lots of things for what's going to work. But that expert's only going to have 2, 3, 4, 5 personas, that characteristic subgroup.
Gotcha.
They're only going to have 2, 3, 4, 5 of those in their head. They might have a handful of observations where, like, I remember, like, the few times we saw this thing, this thing worked for these people, these other things didn't work. When you talk about technology and data and the role it can play in this, it is building that expertise not over 20 or 30 or 50 or 100 observations that a person can have. It's tens of thousands of observations, hundreds of thousands of observations of, I've seen this subgroup of people, these subsets of treatments were given to them, worked for these people.
Okay.
So think of it as like bottling the gut of that expert way more effectively than you're ever going to see in an actual expert. because the government has maintained that data over a long, long period of time
Mm-hmm.
and can build that like highly multifaceted view of a person to optimize the treatments and programs and services you can give that person based on, this is really important, like the historical observed efficacy of those treatments and certain treatments in really, really similar circumstances.
It's really interesting. And how far back does this data go?
So for a lot of these programs, a long, long time. So if you ask about, if think about the very worst circumstances that lead to death,
Mm-hmm.
those vital records databases are really, really old.
Okay.
Like a lot of states now have digitized, paper birth and death certificates a long time ago. If you think about a lot of the other pieces of information that you would want, health information, so admissions, discharge data, that's really good back 20, 30, 40 years. So like you can build a very comprehensive understanding, and probably most importantly, that really long time characteristic data. So you can understand not whether things are going to work for a person this week, but whether they actually create that long-term trajectory change in their lives.
It's incredible. And with all the data that you have, and you being able to see, I guess, what's happened over years up until the point of, today where we're at in 2025, is there a possibility of taking any of that data and maybe predicting something, like predicting a trend that could happen in the future?
Yeah. Let's talk about prediction for a second. I think my personal opinion is prediction on an individual level is really dangerous. So if you're, what was the movie with Tom
Tom
Cruise?
Cruise, Minority Report, yeah.
So like the Minority Report version of prediction, wholly ineffective.
Yeah.
I think you can absolutely use prediction in that context to create a picture of elevated risk of a behavior for a person. But prediction in that context is very, very dangerous.
Really.
A little bit of a false positive prediction can be
Mhm.
horrible for someone, right? However, where I think prediction is really, really helpful is at the population level and understanding, hey, I'm likely to see, talking about this specifically, I'm likely to see, I'm likely to see this portion recover effectively. I'm likely to see this portion of the population, this number of people need these subset of services. So I need to make sure I have capacity
Mhm.
to be able to deliver those services for that subset of people.
Right.
So I think in ensuring you have the right balance of programs and services versus the need, prediction can be really, really helpful.
So same with the talent you have, the programs that you have, and building all these data sets, and who you could have chosen to work with. Why choose this realm versus anything else you could have done with that data? Why specifically aim for helping people like in the recovery, like keeping with that data and helping with law enforcement?
Um, so we solve lots of different problems
Sure.
in government. This is one of the problems we've solved. I think what's unique about this problem and a handful of others is kind of what I mentioned earlier. It's like no one person or one organization feels compelled to solve this problem, nor does one person or organization have all the pieces they need to solve it. So that's where I think data can be truly powerful in helping people solve the problem.
That's incredible because you can be using that for so many different things. I would think, it's like if I had these tools I could use, and you could easily sell them to a big corporation, you know what I mean, and help them solve where their money leaks are happening and how they can make more money, which would be more profitable for you. Solving opioid crisis or helping people into recovery is not, I mean, it's not typically, a big profitable business to get into.
Yeah, I think for us as an organization, I think um, one of the most helpful things we've found in improving our ability to attract people with these unique skill sets that are like extraordinarily powerful is like if I say, okay, I'm a data scientist.
Mhm.
So picture, I finished my PhD in I don't know, machine learning or particle physics or something like that 10 years ago. And I've been working in this space developing, AI and machine learning models to solve, just general problems. Um, I'm going to have a job because that's a skill set that's really highly in demand.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to make enough money to be happy. If I am truly successful and I'm working to say, help somebody optimize the placement of advertisements, right? If I'm truly successful doing that, what's going to happen? Somebody's going to make a little bit more money selling advertisements.
Right.
Now picture the opportunity with us. If you're truly successful doing what you're doing, people are going to live.
Mm.
And society is going to be better off for the work that you're doing. If I'm a data scientist making that trade-off between going to work for somebody to optimize placement of marketing and going to work for an organization that helps not-for-profits and governments and others optimize the application of programs and services to make people's lives better, I'm picking the second one.
Okay. It's not just law enforcement, right? So it's other organizations that are able to look at this data and say, this is what working, this is what not working. Have you seen any of them start to change maybe either the policies or programs or anything that they're doing based on what they've found through your program?
Yes, is the short version. Some of those changes are straightforward and easy. Some of them are really hard.
Mm.
So one of the first things we did, and one of the questions we asked to your earlier point about prediction, is understanding the likely trajectory of the opioid epidemic and where we see people that are likely to become addicted. Do we have the appropriate number in geographic distribution of medication-assisted therapy centers?
Right.
The pretty, confined question. What we concluded was no, there wasn't currently the appropriate distribution and they weren't in the right places.
Mm-hmm.
So we helped optimize the specific location and capacity of those treatment centers to ensure that they can meet the demand. So something like that, like relatively straightforward. What we've often found though, and I'll give the example of doing work to optimize programs and services for offender rehabilitation. So these are people that are currently incarcerated. We got the question I mentioned earlier. So tell us what programs are working and those that aren't. So we'll cancel the ones that aren't working. We reframe that question to say, what's the optimal application of programs and services for each offender to create the best outcome we can for him or her?
Wow.
And what we found was we can do that. We can understand with pretty darn high accuracy the improvement we're going to see in the outcomes for those offenders based on those programs and services. Getting them those programs and services when they need them and getting the right capacity is a different question. And often it meant kind of making decisions about who gets what program or service because of its availability or limited availability. Well, that's hard to do.
Yeah.
So what's nice though about that problem is technology can also play a role in solving that problem. So we recently, I think about a year ago, went live with a virtual classroom environment for the state of Michigan, where we ran into that problem with it. So after you optimize the application of program and services, you have a really hard time getting people in those program and services if they're all in person. So what Michigan said was, well, let's create a digital classroom environment so that we can give more programs and services when they're needed to people who are incarcerated without moving them all over the place all the time to accommodate the availability of people delivering the services. And what we see in Michigan is one, like an uptake in them being able to like deliver programs and services in general, and they're able to do it in a much more targeted way in terms of offering to who needs them when they need them.
Right. Is there a direct positive outcome from the work you've been doing there?
So it's a good question. It goes back to, governments and not-for-profits being able to quantify the impacts that they're making. So I'll first say Michigan's done a lot of work around the programs and services that they use to rehabilitate offenders. They've done some really great work around getting offenders on the job training and skills, and have little micro environments where they're able to practice in-demand skills. So they've done a lot in that space in general. I think what's most positive is if you look back about 15 years ago, Michigan's recidivism rate was hovering around 40%. It's now down to about 22%.
Wow.
So we see huge improvements in the outcomes that they're creating for offenders.
Further down south, where that's home base for me.
Yep.
And down there, Arkansas has one of the highest incarceration rates, and recidivism is over 50%. It stays above, even if it's gone down, it's always above. So it's like usually half. So being able to work with more data would be incredible, and could potentially life changing for so many people to be able to to have access to that, for one, but also know that it's available, and for these organizations and programs that are available to them to know that the work that you're doing is also available to them as well. And so do you exclusively work with only the Indiana and Michigan, or is it open for anybody in the country, or is it selective?
Yeah, we actually work with about 24 states. And I think for us, what's interesting about state governments is like everyone wants to do the right thing. Like universally, we find that just the best people working in these spaces. Often you won't even know what tools are available to you.
Wow.
So we would love to work with more states in the South.
That's incredible. John, thank you so much for taking time to come and to talk about Resultant and all the work that you're doing. So if somebody is interested in learning more about what you guys are doing at Resultant, where can they go for that?
I think probably the best place to go is our website at resultant.com. You can find case studies and a heck of a lot more data about the outcomes we partner with states to create.
Thank you so much for, like I said, sharing your time, sharing your knowledge, and letting us know that there's so much more work to do. For one, you've created more work, which is a good thing, but in a positive direction, where I think it's actually going to have a better outcome than if we just aimlessly tried to heal these wounds, but rather than here's the data and here's what you actually need. So it's great work with you guys are doing. I mean, excited to learn it. And you've said a lot of things here where I've still got to process over the next few days before I'm like, okay, that's what that means. That's inside. That's incredible. Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you so much. If you are watching this episode on YouTube, you can find us on any of the audio podcast platforms, from iHeart, Apple, Spotify, anywhere that you listen to podcasts, and vice versa. If you're listening to this as an audio podcast, you can find us on YouTube. And I always talk about subscribing and commenting and all that. That's great. We love that. But the most useful thing that you can do to help us grow, but also to get the message to the people that need to hear the message, is share this episode with someone. The worst you can do is share it with them and then they don't ever listen to it. The best is that they listen to it and it changes their life. And so here, if you heard John say any of these incredible things that they're working on, and this is such a different approach than what I've heard, and I've talked to people from all over the US, and so the approach that you're taking is incredible, and working with real data, which is what everybody asks for. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer. If you heard that and say, I know exactly who needs to hear about this, or maybe it's a policymaker in your state that needs to hear about this, share this episode with them and see where it goes. And so I appreciate that. I appreciate you listening. I appreciate John for being here. Thank you so much.
For sure.
And we'll see you in the next episode.